Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This week has brought a record-breaking global average temperature, heat warnings across the country, and the official word that El Niño has returned. But what will this mean for our summer and beyond? And summer jobs can be a rite of passage for many teens, but where can they find a good gig? And is it all about the money, or can they learn something more valuable? I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. The entire world is experiencing some hot weather this week. Average global air temperature over the last 2 days has been the hottest on record since we began keeping track decades ago. That's because of human-caused climate change and the cyclic climate pattern known as El Niño. We'll talk more about the implications of rising global temperatures coming up soon, but first, here in BC, we've been breaking our own heat records since May, and that scorching sun will continue throughout the week. For more on what we're to expect, we're joined by Tyler Hamilton. He's a meteorologist for the Weather Network. Thanks for joining us, Tyler. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always so great to talk to you. What's it looking like for people across BC, today and throughout the rest of this week?
On again, off again smoke. So the temperatures look to peak throughout most of the South Coast by Wednesday afternoon. So
Okay.
temperatures will slowly return back to seasonal by Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But what's more concerning, Amy, is the lack of rainfall forecast in and around the South Coast. We had one of the driest Mays in June combined on record for the South Coast. 2015 was the only year, when you look at the records, that was drier than the previous 60 days.
Wow. And I mean, we always joke about it here in BC is that January system. And I mean, we didn't have it. It's just, is that what we're going to see sort of moving forward?
It's unfortunate because those January systems can really dictate how the wildfire season in July and August really comes to fruition.
Right.
And unfortunately, I took a look at the models the next 1 to 2 weeks. And in fact, Victoria, Vancouver Island, we have extreme wildfire danger essentially blanketing Port Hardy all the way down to Saanich. And I don't really see that changing over the next couple of weeks. We really need that rain, and it is the dry season after all.
Right. And it doesn't mean we'll necessarily be getting it. What systems are causing this heat currently?
Well, Amy, we got a lot of factors at play creating global record-breaking temperatures. We've got record-breaking sea surface temperatures when you take a look at the North Atlantic and combine every ocean basin on the planet. That's tipping us over the edge, but it's really El Nino, a little bit closer to home.
Okay.
We're getting this sea surface temperature anomaly just off the equator, South Pacific, west of Peru. That is really bringing in even more heat, which happens through the summer months of an El Nino, especially for Western Canada.
Okay, and we've seen those higher than average temperatures throughout the spring and, so far this summer. What are we really looking through, throughout July? How are you projecting things will look for the next coming weeks?
Yeah, and we can peer into those long range forecasts, and
Yeah.
I have unfortunately high confidence most of British Columbia will be warmer than normal through the month of July, with most of the province, especially southern sections, dealing with below normal precipitation.
And how much, if any, of this can be blamed on El Nino? Is this already causing an impact, or is this something we'll see more in the future, more long term in terms of weather?
Yeah, so El Nino and climate change are sort of working in tandem here. The fingerprints of climate change are going to be on this summer pattern, the wildfire season across Canada, record breaking, of course. But El Nino, when you put all the previous El Ninos, summer El Ninos rather, across the province of BC, most of them end up being a little bit warmer than normal, where the correlation is weak. When we look at the state of El Nino, La Nino, there doesn't seem to be a strong correlation with how ferocious the wildfire season is, but obviously we burned 1 million hectares so far most of
Right.
that in the Prince George Fire Center, and we're still a ways away from peak wildfire season.
Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, this week we saw the highest temperatures globally ever recorded, and that I believe is a global average. So, what's your reaction to hearing that news?
This is stunning because it's coming from a data set that is essentially a gold standard. It's called the ERA 5. This is a European temperature climate data set, essentially, that has never reached the 17-degree global average threshold. That's going back to the 1930s, 1940s, even.
Right.
So that record was broken on Monday. I'm curious to see what happened yesterday, Tuesday. I think we might have even surpassed it again, as northern hemisphere is really baking in a lot of heat so far this summer.
And you know, it's first when I heard 17 degrees, like, oh, it's not that hot. It was 27 here, but I mean, that's a global temperature, and that has huge implications.
Yeah, Amy, to put that in perspective, that's 4 standard deviations above normal for this time period. It's pretty remarkable to see that global average. When, I was growing up and studying meteorology in school, you read a textbook, the average is between 15 and 16 degrees
Right.
as a planetary system, and now we're pushing above that to 17. So that is definitely a red flag.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Tyler. I have no doubt we'll be coming back to you for weather news as we continue to break, temperatures over the coming weeks. But we really appreciate you taking the time.
All right, take care, Amy. Cheers.
You too. That's Tyler Hamilton, a meteorologist for the Weather Network. We do want to hear from you. What steps are you taking to ease your climate impact? Are you experiencing climate anxiety? How are you planning to manage the heat this summer? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also reach us star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And for more on what the global record means, we're joined by Inayat Singh. He is a CBC reporter who covers the environment and climate change. Hi, Inayat. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi.
So we did just hear a little bit about the upcoming forecast in BC. How have temperatures been near you in Ontario recently?
Well, more of the same. There's a heat warning on today, actually. So I have the AC going, and there's a high of 32 degrees. But I think what's different here is we have high humidity as well here in
Exactly.
Ontario.
Yeah, and that
So
makes it feel, how much hotter does it feel for you?
yeah, it feels much hotter. I have a husky, and she's really slow on the walks this morning. So we're feeling it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just a minor thing I think is worth mentioning, is as we don't always think about how this impacts everything, how it impacts our pets, and all of the things that we, hold dear are greatly impacted by these weather temperatures. We're talking about the global record-breaking temperatures. When it comes, what does come to your mind when you hear this?
Well, I'm thinking about all of the events we're seeing around the world
Right.
related to this. So, we saw that 17-degree figure, but in real terms, that's a lot of heat for people in various regions in the world. So just this year, we've seen extreme heat in the UK, other parts of Europe. We're seeing what's happening in southern United States, in Texas, but also in developing countries where people have, fewer means to cope with this weather. Heat waves in India, in China. There are huge disruptions. There have been deaths from heat, and there's going to be massive disruptions to food. So that's what I'm watching. That's what's really concerning when I think about extreme heat.
Okay, and how does it sort of impact, if we can come back to Canada, how do the rising global temperatures affect the different regions throughout our country?
Well, it's important to remember that the world is heating a certain level, but Canada is actually heating at twice that level. That's according
Really?
to research from the
Okay.
federal government. So Canada is actually heating twice as fast as the rest of the world. And northern Canada, the Arctic, is heating 3 to 4 times. So your viewers, your listeners must have heard of the 1.5 degree kind of global warming goal that we're trying to limit global warming to.
Right.
Well, Canada's already passed that, probably. So, it's important to remember that heating there's the average heating globally, but it's going to affect us much more. It's going to affect people in the north much, much more.
And what sort of impact would that have, I guess, on the ecology? I mean, just thinking about what that would do up north to, I guess, the permafrost. What are some of the other effects that we'll see across the country as a result of these high temperatures?
Well, the biggest concern, in terms of ecosystems is that this heat is going to supercharge global warming itself. So in the north, like you mentioned, the permafrost, there's a lot of plant matter and carbon that's stored frozen in those soils.
Right.
With heating, that permafrost is going to melt and that carbon is going to be lost into the atmosphere. So it's supercharging global warming itself. So that's a big concern.
And what about the impact that it'll have just on people in general?
Well, we have learned that, out of all of the climate impacts, extreme heat is probably the one that's going to be the most deadly for Canadians,
Right.
especially in regions that aren't prepared for it. You learned that in BC, but we've seen that in Ontario and Quebec. People aren't ready for the heat, and especially the combination of heat and humidity. And the government is actually working on this. There is a national adaptation strategy, and a big focus of that is to prepare communities to deal with this heat because, we're going to see some major impacts from it.
We'd love people to join our conversation, of course. You can call us in today, 1-800-825-5950. You can also reach us locally, 604-669-3733. Feel free to shoot us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. I believe that we do have a call on the line. Todd from Prince George. Hi, Todd. How are you?
Hey, not bad. I'm really hot.
I think many people in the country can sympathize with that, and certainly across BC. Did you have a question or just a comment on our conversation today?
Well, I think the conversation, if I'm not mistaken, is about keeping cool this summer.
Yeah, that is part of it.
We need to think way farther in advance. Like anybody with children and grandchildren, we're talking about their food supply. How are you going to grow plants when they just burn coming out of the ground? How are you going to grow food? Like, this is getting serious. And I'm sitting here in a car that I bought, $60,000 electric car, to try and do my part. But I'm sitting in a parking lot that is absolutely full. There's one EV parked beside me. The rest are gas-powered vehicles. Nobody is taking this stuff seriously. And the province is on fire. People need to think about their children and their grandchildren not being able to produce food for themselves.
You're right. So it's a long.
Everybody's kind of joking, haha, it's funny and it's nice and warm, and what are you going to do? And I'll put the air conditioning on.
Right.
It goes way, way beyond that. It's survival now. And nobody's changing. The fuel companies have everybody so brainwashed that they just think this is a one-off, tomorrow it's going to be better or something. I don't understand the majority of people's thinking on this. Maybe they're just tuning it out and looking at their cell phones and looking at the latest video on, whatever the platform is of the day. But it's pretty serious. People need to get real and get serious and make some changes.
I agree.
My next move probably is I'm probably going to go some sort of heat pump in the house. It's going to be my next move. And that's sort of, I'm not looking to save money anymore. I'm looking to make changes so that I'm not making a big impact.
Right.
So that my kids won't look back at me and say, what the H were you thinking when you did that, right?
Right. I think
when they, it's getting serious. Anyway, I got to cut it short. I got to go back to work.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I think Todd raised some very valid points that, perhaps it's not about saving money. It literally is about saving the planet, and that we do have a responsibility to look very far into the future to make sure there's a home, habitable place for our children, for our grandchildren. And looking ahead is a great idea, but extreme heat is an immediate danger to some people. And so how can we balance that sort of long and short-term mitigation around climate change? As we saw with the heat dome in BC, it was the elderly and those that were most in need that unfortunately succumbed to that heat. So, how can we balance both short and long-term issues?
And, the federal government and provincial governments are thinking about exactly that.
Okay.
So I mentioned the National Adaptation Strategy. It comes with a bunch of goals and money. So it comes with about $2 billion in new spending. And one of its goals is to eliminate deaths from heat waves by 2040.
Okay.
It also sets to establish 15 new urban national parks, which will also, lower temperatures in urban areas. So that money is going to go towards things like cooling centers, go towards things like retrofitting seniors' residences and helping people retrofit their homes. And separate from that, there is also an upcoming Canada Green Building Strategy. Todd over there mentioned bringing in a heat pump for his home. And a lot of homeowners here in Toronto as well want to do that. Heat pumps are energy efficient and they can heat and cool your home through electricity, not fossil fuels. And so, but they need money, they need financing, they need help. And there are some programs in the pipeline that will open up that money for homeowners.
Okay. These global temperatures that we're talking about, there are some countries that contribute more to climate change than others. What are some sticking points, I guess, between those developing and those wealthy countries or wealthy nations?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we are seeing this extreme heat is hitting wealthier countries and lower income countries. But of course, the wealthier countries have the resources, like Canada does, has the money to help communities prepare. Poorer countries don't. And that's become a major sticking point in global climate negotiations. The world has goals. Everybody's signed up. Everybody's kind of agreed what the problem is and what needs to be done. But a major problem is getting financing. The developing world borrows at interest rates that are 2 to 3 times the interest rates that rich countries like Canada get financing for. Reforming global institutions and getting loans to do climate mitigation adaptation work is going to be a major negotiating point at the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference. It was discussed at a climate finance conference in Paris last month, and momentum is growing to find some solutions so that lower income countries can get the money they need to do this work.
Okay, we're going to head to another call now. Robert in Vancouver. Hi, thanks for calling into BC today.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. So I just wanted to mention that I'm almost 70 and I've been following the whole climate thing my whole life. I almost went to university to study environmentalism and whatnot, but that didn't work out for other reasons. I just wanted to say that if people want to understand how we got here, they want to read a book called The Petroleum Papers by Jeff Nambicki, who's a Canadian who grew up in northern Alberta right by the tar sands. And the book clearly shows how the oil industry from a long time ago, way before 1980, knew that they were courting disaster. And in the early 80s, Shell's own scientists told them that by the year 2000, it may be too late to undo climate disaster with feedback loops, etc. Last year, and here we are now, this is not climate change. This is the start of climate collapse, okay? And here we are now. Last year, the oil industry globally made over $3.5 trillion in profits, and we're supposed to pay for mitigation?
It is very frustrating. I think many people do share that frustration.
It's not frustrating, it's criminal.
I thank you so much for calling in, Robert. I think that's a very fair point, too, is that there are many people that feel that this has been going on for a very long time. Many people have been sounding these alarms, and we just have not taken it seriously. That the big oil companies have been pushing this agenda. Do you think we're seeing more of a wake-up call amongst everybody? Is there more of a willingness to sort of learn what the problems are and to move ahead with this?
Well, definitely. I mean, we saw, especially with the wildfires,
Exactly.
Toronto had really poor air quality, but look at the cities in the US, New York, looking like something out of a disaster movie. So I think, obviously global warming has been around for a while, but in the past decade, in the past 5 years, we're seeing from all of these heat records being broken, it's become a lot more obvious and it's affecting a lot more people. It's affecting people on their morning walks.
Right.
It's really close to home. So there's definitely a greater realization of what the problem is. And there's going to be more pressure. I think we're hearing from your listeners. People want answers and people want answers from their government, and they're willing to put that political pressure, but also make changes at home. We're seeing those two things being balanced just on this show. So definitely, I think that there's going to be a push for more action.
Yeah, and I think, and that's key, is we're seeing it on those two fronts. People are pushing the governments and holding people accountable, but they are also taking accountability themselves and doing what they can. I'll just read an email now from Anne. She writes, "What I'd like to know is why aren't the big companies, as well as the government, telling us what they're planning on doing to help offset the planet heating up? I'm sure they are producing more carbon emissions than the average person is. We're all told to recycle and reduce and reuse, but why can't we hear from the big companies and know what they are up to? The government says they've got plans, but the target years are always so far into the future. What's with that?" And I guess that's something I've often wondered too, is we hear how quickly things are changing, how dire the situation is, but then when we hear government and companies announce these targets, they really do seem like they're quite far in the future. Is there a way that we maybe could look at getting companies and getting people to be acting a little bit more quickly? Is there a way we can sort of place more pressure on people in it?
Well, that is part of the purpose of these targets. So I think,
Okay.
a lot of people hear the target of 2050, right? Net zero by 2050 is what a lot of people have heard of. And 2050 is so far away in
It
the future.
is. Yeah.
But it does represent the amount of time we will need to make the transformational changes that
Okay.
we need. A huge amount of our energy, even in Canada, comes from fossil fuels, and we are actually one of the better countries. We have a lot of hydro and other renewable energy, nuclear here in Ontario. But even for us, it's going to be a huge change. So we kind of do need those 2050 targets, but we do have short-term targets as well.
Okay.
We have an emissions goal for 2030 that's coming up. We have more short-term targets for specific things like reducing methane emissions from oil and gas production in BC, Alberta. So it's a combination of having a giant goal in the future
Okay.
and then kind of working towards it through more short-term actions. But we can't have that transformational change in 10 years. We can have a lot of change, but we still do need to work on this problem for, a couple of decades, 3 decades at least.
Okay. Yeah, it's balancing that short and long term. And I guess having the patience and believing what you do today really will have an impact. We'll just go quickly to one last call. Helen in Crescent Valley. Helen, I believe you wrote a poem that you'd like to share that you wrote during an extreme heat event here in BC.
Yeah, it was during the summer 21 when we had it's 2 years, pretty much around this time.
Okay.
Yeah, I find it really hard to have summers now. I used to look forward to summers, and now I look forward to winter because of the heat.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are in that situation, feeling a little guilty. Why don't you, I'd love to hear the piece that you wrote.
Okay. A high of 45 degrees, snowfields depleting with the speed of our greed, overflowing rock flower-soaked rivers feed, oceans acidified by the heat of our deeds. The greenery is wilting, the cedars are dying, interior rainforest is frying. You'll adapt to deal with the desert heat, our forests on fire, too hot to beat. Where are the hummingbirds who migrated last year? Did they fly into a cloud of poison? This is what I fear. Washington, Oregon, California, fire. My small friends followed their bio clocks to expire. Politicians deny the truth to the detriment of our youth. don't want to risk their numbers at the poll booth. More important to be elected to appease the carbon-hungry economies. Who cries the loudest with every dip in their stocks? It's the 1% afraid they'll lose their lot. Do they realize how their actions affect our health? No, to hell with the masses. It's about protecting their wealth. Billionaires compete to fly into space. 250,000 will secure your place. To fly in a rocket that looks like a penis. To look down on Earth before it looks like Venus. Our mother is heating. Pollinators disappearing. Agriculture takes a beating with every degree of heating. We'll have to become machines to survive in the future, because humans won't exist if we continue to consume her. Anyway, that was it.
Thank you, Helen. That was beautiful. And what a wonderful way to sum up so many of the fears and emotions, the anger that people are experiencing. Thank you for that. And Anayat, thank you so much for joining us as well. It was tremendous to be able to speak with you and get your ideas. And I'm sure we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was Anayat Singh. He's a CBC reporter who covers the environment and climate change. And coming up, summer jobs can be a great way for students to make some extra cash, but they can also learn something that might be even more valuable while they're on the clock. That's coming right up after the 12:30 news with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The man who fatally stabbed one person and injured 6 others outside a North Vancouver library is back in court for sentencing. Yannick Banbuego pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, attempted murder, and aggravated assault back in May. His lawyer has declined to speculate on the 30-year-old's rationale for the attacks. There's no word on when the Kelowna courthouse will reopen after it was evacuated this morning after what police describe as a threat against the building. RCMP were called in to clear the facility at around 9:40. The Mounties say a search of the courthouse is ongoing. And the BC Wildfire Service says with the recent spell of warmer weather, the fire danger rating in many parts of the province is on the rise. It's now listed as high to extreme in many areas. As a result, campfire bans are coming back into effect starting at noon on Friday in both the Coastal and the Kamloops fire centers. A ban is already in place in the Prince George Fire Center. And now the forecast heat warnings are in place for Fort Nelson and inland sections of the Central Coast. On the North Coast, increasing cloudiness this afternoon with a high of 19. Highs reaching 27 with local smoke and some sunshine in the Peace. In the Central Interior, smoky and sunny with a high of 28. Highs to 30 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the Southern Interior, mainly sunny and hazy with a high of 32. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, sunny this afternoon, hazy in some areas with highs reaching 30 inland. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Amy with BC Today.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome back to BC Today here. Yes, on CBC Radio, I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott this week. And thanks for being with us online. You can listen live at cbc.ca BC, or you can always listen on your CBC Listen app. The Port of Vancouver is a key gateway for Asian trade, but port workers are now in their 5th day on strike. Jeff Nankerville is president and CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, and he spoke to Gloria Makarenko on the early edition this morning.
The vast majority of the exports to Asia are going out through the BC ports, and also the vast majority of the imports. For example, 99% of the cars that come into Canada that are made in Asia, with the largest manufacturers being from Japan and Korea, but now also growing supply from China. Over 400,000 cars a year coming into the Canadian market are coming through the BC ports. There's no question this kind of thing has an impact on Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier. The 6-week trucker strike in 2014 around the Port of Vancouver did have an impact on the attitude of buyers in Asia to Canada as a source. So for those products that can be sourced from elsewhere, from producing countries like Brazil or Australia or the USA or even Russia, buyers who have been buying a lot from Canada to import into places like China, Japan, South Korea, they will be looking to diversify their supplies.
That was Jeff Nankavelli. He's the president and CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Well, it is summer, school's out, and high school students and young people entering the workforce are heading into ice cream parlors and maybe rec centers to make some summer cash. But aside from the money, there are also many valuable lessons to be learned from working your first job. So we want to hear your experiences now. What was your first or maybe even your favorite summer job? What lessons did you learn? And how do you talk about employment and finances with the young people in your life? Do you think young people maybe need more education on financial management? Call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Mark Ting, partner with Foundation Wealth, personal finance instructor at SFU. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Great. So nice to talk with you. So what advice do you give young people who are looking for summer employment? Because I think sometimes they're not sure where to start.
Yeah, for one, I commend them for actually getting a summer job. Statistics have shown that students that work during the summers in the future, they actually do quite well. They have sort of a leg up in terms of getting pay and landing better jobs. And part of that is padding your resume. So it's one of those things where you can have education, but it's great to have that experience. So I'm all for summer jobs. Both my kids have summer jobs. One is actively looking for a new one. The other one had a summer job from last year, and because she did a good job, she just got rehired. So it was quite easy. So that's one thing that I would say. Like, if you do a summer job, do it well so that next year you have another job just waiting for you.
Right. I mean, that goes with any job. What do you say, though, to some parents? I know there is a school of thought where they think they're young, you're only young once, they should be allowed to enjoy their summer, should be, have that freedom. But as you said, that it has shown that working in their summers or working part-time, I guess, while they're at school, really does have these benefits for them.
Huge benefits. Okay. So first off, you got a different sense of authority. So typically students will have teachers, parents as their sort of that sense of authority, and now you got a boss thrown into the mix, and you got money also involved. So from a personal finance perspective, this could be the first time that students or young people actually get a paycheck, have to pay taxes, and often they don't have to pay taxes, but they should do their taxes because they get it back.
Right.
But they learn all these skills. And so when it goes through other parts of their life in terms of time management, having responsibility, working under pressure, these are all great things to do. And there's nothing like real life experience to have that happen and develop those skills.
Right. So where are young people looking for summer jobs? And, are minimum wage jobs their only option? Is that meeting their bar? Or what is sort of out there that they're, I guess, trying to connect with?
Yeah, it's a pretty good, strong job market. So over the last couple of years, I'm just thinking back at my kids. My kids would just basically spend one day applying, and they'd be almost inundated with job offers, like 3 to 4 places. They'd go to interviews and they'd land a job right away.
Right.
It's not as strong as that right now.
Okay.
So right now, my son's applying for several places, and he's still having to do interviews, and it's more of a process. But it still feels like they have the upper hand. So yes, typically minimum wage jobs, but considering that minimum wage is $16.75, that's often plenty for them.
It's a lot different than I think I was making, $4.25 when I first started working. So yeah, it definitely, but that can also, I suppose in a way, bring up other issues because they are making all of this income. And for some of them, it is incredibly disposable. They're not paying necessarily rent. They're not paying bills. Mom and dad are still, footing the majority of that. Is it at times a bit too much too soon that they're having suddenly all this money to deal with?
Well, this is the time where they should make mistakes. So let's say they make a lot of money and they spend it all right away, and then they're out of money. Well, okay, you learn from that. So from a parent's perspective, you allow them to make those mistakes, but you also don't bail them out. So if they run out of money and they want to go to the P&E or they want to go out with their friends and they have no money, don't be the parent to say, okay, here's some money. You can pay me back with your next paycheck.
Okay.
I'd be the mean person would say, no, too bad. Like you got to learn from these mistakes. And there's nothing like learning from I'm running out of money.
Yeah, and I suppose not being able to go to the Peony is a bit better than not being able to pay your rent if this happens to you when you're older.
Right.
I would love people to join this conversation because I find people always have great stories about their first jobs, their first summer jobs. And speaking of the Peony, I feel like that's where half of Vancouver gets their summer employment every year. So we'd love for you to share. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 star or pound 690. We just want to hear your experience. What was your first summer job, or what was your favorite summer job? You can also email us at bctoday.ca. You did speak earlier about how your daughter, I believe, did such a great job with her first job. She was able to parlay that into a second summer. How important is building connections in improving chances for employment?
Well, they say in life, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right.
So I find in just my personal career path, and as well as many others, having connections is very, very important. So if you're going to have these summer jobs, I mean, you think about it, what are the main reasons? For most young people, it's just to make money, right? They make money, disposable income, so they can do things throughout the year. But then if you take that a step further, you also have the opportunity to make a really good impression. So you make these good impressions, you're more likely to be invited back. You're more likely to be offered a really good reference letter. All of these things are stepping stones to progression, right? So your next job. So right now you might be minimum wage, but maybe next summer you got a different job where you get paid more, and you need these stepping stones to get to that point.
Right.
So yeah, I would say very important.
Okay. We're going to take a call now from Keith in Vancouver. Keith, hi. Thanks for calling in.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm great. So what were some of the jobs you maybe had growing up?
Yeah, I had many jobs over the years. I did a lot of landscaping, literally working 12, 14-hour days,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So tired that I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I was actually still at work, and if I stopped, I might get in trouble. So
Right.
a little overtired with that one.
Yeah.
But sold hot dogs to people going to the bars in Halifax, swept the streets for the Downtown Business Improvement Association. So I would literally work from 9 to 5, do some beer sampling from 5 to 9, and kind of 9:30 onwards, I'd sell the hot dogs to the people that I was probably serving the beer to
Right.
earlier in the day.
Yeah.
So it all kind of went full circle. But I guess my thing is that you can balance it. You don't have to work I don't know how many 14-hour days they did, but I definitely did some 12. And you can balance it. I think just thinking having some form of a summer job gives a lot of responsibility. I mean, starting even with a lemonade stand, I did that with my friend's child last summer. And she made, I don't know, $60, $70 in an hour and a half. So, but just gives that responsibility, knowing that things actually do cost money. And, that pizza and that ice cream, and it gives a responsibility of interacting with people. And then, hey, you can actually maybe take your mom or somebody for that ice cream. So it gives a lot of pride in that way, too. So.
Oh, well, I agree. And it sounds like you did have many, yes, tough jobs, but fun jobs. Thanks for calling in, Keith. I appreciate that. Mark, what's your response to that in a way? Like, sometimes you're going to work these grueling 12-hour days. Other times it's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more fun. Is that a good balance to, sort of achieve, especially as you're starting out?
Yeah, it depends on your goals. If your goals is to make as much money in the shortest period of time, I generally recommend going for the harder working jobs, the less glamorous ones. I think back to my jobs. I did make $4.75, I believe, an hour my first job at Church's Fried Chicken.
Yeah.
But I also made $9 an hour because I ended up switching a month later, and I made double my pay. But that was gutting fish, salmon, and taking the guts out and processing it. So I was willing to do that because it was paying me double.
Right.
So sometimes, those are the cost benefits. About the lemonade stand, just one quick thing.
Yeah.
We did that as well. But what I did was I made sure my kids paid for all the ingredients, because I know a lot of parents will just give them all the ingredients and they make all the profit, and I didn't think that was realistic.
Right.
So me trying to give them a lesson, I was like, okay, here's your costs. this is how you must charge. These are your profits. So these are all sort of lessons that hopefully they're learning.
Well, and that it is important in that sense that they need to learn that there's many steps and a lot of things you do give up to inevitably make some money. We have another call now from Brian in Port Moody. Hi, Brian. Thanks for calling into BC Today.
Hi. I have a great summer job that my son had.
Oh, yeah.
After his first year at law school.
Okay.
And being top of his class, he was able to choose the job he wanted. And he got a job writing salary briefs for salary arbitrations for the NHL Players Association.
That's impressive.
And he was making $17.50 an hour, so $700 a week.
Wow. And how long ago was that?
About 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Yeah, not a bad way. And I'm assuming he was a big hockey fan if that's what he went for first.
Yeah, for sure. It was awesome. And he's a lawyer now. I mean, my first job, I worked as a parking lot attendant at the Canadian National Exhibition. For like $2 an hour or whatever it was.
And all good jobs, but I love that he was sort of able to parlay his love for hockey into a very well-paying job. So thanks for sharing that, Brian. Really appreciate it. Take care. And Mark, I think too, I mean, certainly doing with salary negotiations for hockey players, a little bit different than gutting fish, or for myself, cleaning up after serving the Dutch Pannenkoeks for many summers. But they are all important. It is nice to see students being able to, I guess, connect something they have a passion for into a job or something that will help them with their future. Is that something you would recommend, that kids or teens sort of look to something that meets their unique interests, or just go for what's out there?
A bit of both, depending what the job market is. But a lot of people have fun at their jobs. So I had a very similar job to the caller, where I worked at the airport and I was parking cars. And the cool thing about that job was I got to drive like $100,000 cars when I'm 16.
Nice.
And all the Canucks parked with us. So like Pavel Bure or Trevor Linden, they drive up, they knew who we are. We take their cars, we got to drive them around. And, at the airport, you get these nice little straightaways. So it's not like you're just parking into a stall. You actually get to drive the cars around. So a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of good memories.
And I think that's something I hear over and over again, and you can hear it in some of these people that are sharing with us, is no matter what the job was, they're young, they're with, they make friends on the job, and there is a lot of joy. It's not necessarily this hard slog and they're giving up their summer freedom. There can be a lot of fun in what they're doing. And I'll just go to an email that we have from Joanna Victoria, and she writes, my first job at a fast food restaurant, I was earning $1.15 an hour. I actually worked after school from 4 p.m. to midnight, Tuesday to Saturday, every day for a year. There were other young people working who were finished school. When we were not busy, I was cleaning, not because I had to, but it was better than standing around being bored. Long story short, I kept this routine up, detail cleaning. Our fast food restaurant had an unscheduled health inspection, and we won an award for the cleanest fast food restaurant. I was the only changed, so the owner-manager gave me a 25-cent an hour raise. The lesson I learned was consciousness and hard work pay off. Literally. And I think that's a classic example of somebody, recognizing that, yes, I worked hard and there was a direct benefit from it. Mark, you teach a course called Economics for Success at local high schools. What is sort of new knowledge you hope students will walk away from after you share with them?
Yeah, that's a good example, the email, because I one of the things I say is, like, if you're going to be there, try to make an impression.
Right.
So this person took initiative and started cleaning, A, because they were bored and they just wanted something to do, and B, because it's their personality type. And I think that's great, because essentially workers are there to solve problems for their bosses or their employers. So I had this exact same conversation with my son, who got offered a job at a sort of a bubble tea place. And he went there and he knew the people who worked there, and it was pretty much dead. It was a very slow business. So he said, all I got to do is like make a drink once an hour, and I'm on my phone. It's really good. And I was like, that's probably not a good use of your time.
Right.
He's like, it doesn't matter. I get paid the same. I was like, but you could be learning other things. Time will go a lot faster if you're busier. There's all these other benefits. So I always think about that. It's like, if you're going to be there, try to learn something. And I go back to, again, I'm talking about myself, but I worked as an electrician. I learned electrical work, drywall work, driving forklifts, all these skills that I worked at summer jobs that I actually use now in my day-to-day life. So now I can do simple electrical work or drywalling, which instead of paying somebody like $50 an hour to do it. So those are sort of the things I think about. Is like, get a job, try to learn a new skill, see if you like it, see what you don't like, and that will sort of mold what kind of jobs you want to go for in the future.
Right. And I think that's such a good point, is all of these jobs, the skills that we learn, they don't disappear if we move on to another job. You still can use that knowledge in different aspects of your life. And I do think sometimes people do, forget that. Again, we'd love you to share with us your first summer jobs, your favorite summer jobs. Call us on the line, 1-800-825-5950. You can also call us 604-669-3733. Shoot us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. Mark, some parents prefer their teens to spend this time not taking summers off, but taking extra classes. Is this something that you would recommend?
Yeah, to be honest, no. Like I'm more of, I think you need both. You need education and you need experience.
Right.
And I think there's so much you can learn and so many benefits you get from summer jobs that are even outpace getting that maybe higher grade. And I do know a lot of parents that will say, okay, I'm going to do math 11 during the summer so I don't have to do it during the semester, so I can take another course and various other things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's up to the parents. But my personal opinion is I rather my students, my son, daughters, whatever, like experience new people, new different environments, get out of their comfort zones. I think those are sort of the life lessons that employers are looking for, sort of that initiative, instead of that is their comfort zone. Studying is where they like to be, but let's see how they act outside of that. And it's so easy to do it in a sort of a nice way in a first time job, because there's not a lot of pressure on you. But I think that these are the baby steps I really like. And I think back at that, the person who wrote in, I guarantee you she's going to get she did receive a phenomenal reference from her boss. And again, how much would you pay for that reference? Like that legitimate from the heart reference, like those go a long way. To me, probably more than maybe getting an extra, going from a B+ to an A.
Okay, fair enough. A good point, though, to bring up is young people at times, especially on the younger side, or really depending on their disposition, they can be really worried about, I guess, standing up for themselves. And that, I think, at times maybe could lead to managers taking advantage of them. So how do we teach our kids to really stand up for themselves and be advocates for themselves when they do go into the workforce?
Well, I guess right now, there are rules. There's minimum wage, hours, like those are pretty set in stone, and they're fairly generous I would say, for people in student age range. But again, they should stand up for themselves. If they're solving problems, like if that listener who wrote in, like got that restaurant or that business, like a top mark that was really showed her value, mm-hmm. then she by all means should mention that and ask for a raise or be given, and she was given a raise. But I've done that several times during my life. Like you get scheduled raises, but if I've done more and consistently and I'm very reliable and I have the option of going somewhere else, then the employer will likely want to keep that person and will pay up for it. So it's just showing your worth.
In terms of that as well, getting paid maybe for your worth, some employers are struggling to find employees, and some of the jobs, young people often get them, but they pay minimum wage or below a living wage. So is there an onus on employers maybe to make sure that even their young workforce, if they're hoping to go out on their own, if they're wanting to pay their own bills, that they do make sure they're making enough, or is that an unrealistic expectation?
There's a lot of studies about this, very controversial about the minimum wage. A lot of studies, and I would say most like economic studies will say that a very high minimum wage actually hurts the people that it's intended to help. And part of that is businesses only can do so much. So what happens is they hire less people. So people get laid off. Now, the other stat is most people who work minimum wage, like not all, but most, according to the statistics, are not in that situation where they're the main breadwinners or even a couple of two minimum wage.
Right.
Most people who do minimum wage are like my kids who live at home, are really doing it for disposable income. So I would say it'd be hard for someone who owns, say, a Dairy Queen to pay a living wage.
Okay.
But it's great for bigger corporations like, say, Van City. I know they do that, and some of the other ones who can afford to do it and probably have staff that have more responsibilities to pay that living wage. So I wouldn't say across the board that it should be enforced. That's my opinion.
Okay, but we do know there are a lot of people in our workforce that they are sort of their only option are to take these lower paying jobs, these minimum wage jobs, and with the incredible price of groceries, of rent, it just makes the cost of living completely out of touch. Is this maybe something that needs to be revisited, that either the minimum wage does need to be raised, or we need to be making sure that these jobs can allow people to afford basic living arrangements?
Yeah, well, again, that's the problem. If you go back to the studies and everything, they say often hiring the minimum wage, most economists will say that's not a good idea. Like, it sounds good on purpose, and we of course empathize and we sympathize for this group, but doing it broad-based against everybody who's working a minimum wage job, which they are the minority, that has other detrimental effects. Again, a lot of them will get laid off. That's just simple. A lot of them will be replaced by automation. If your labor costs get too high, then the incentive for businesses to automate is that much higher. So there's all these consequences that come along with higher increases. And of course, prices go up and everything, there's a bit of a snowball effect. So if I were to go by the statistics, again, very controversial, lots of opinions on both sides, but I would say it would be I would probably say that having a living wage across the board is a bad idea.
Okay. Well, I am sure there are many people that, as you said, will disagree, but it is controversial, and it's something I think many of us are still trying to figure out. And real quick, just last question before I let you go. What was your favorite job growing up?
I would have to say driving the cars was really fun. Like, literally.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, I was driving these dream cars, like Porsches, the brand new Porsches, and I got to know a lot of the hockey players, so got their autographs. They knew me by name, and it was a nice crew that I worked with. So I'd probably say that's probably the most fun I had in the summer. I also really enjoyed driving forklifts.
Oh, well, there you go. A tale of two drives. Thanks. That's Mark Ting, partner with Foundation Wealth, personal finance instructor at SFU. And that is our show for today. My thanks to everyone who called in, to everyone that emailed. I'm Amy Bell. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.